Community-centered, community-supported. Alaska Public Media. Alaska Insight is supported in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers just like you. Thank you.
With mortgage rates at their highest level in 2 decades and rental prices increasing dramatically across the state, it's getting harder for Alaskans to find adequate housing.
And then I come back to Anchorage, Alaska, and they're like, we want $1,400 a month for like some, 1980s never remodeled special. And I'm like, I'm not going to pay that.
What's causing the housing crunch? And what efforts are underway to meet the demand for new housing in Alaska? We'll discuss it right now on Alaska Insight. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for the premiere episode of Season 7 of Alaska Insight. We're grateful to have you with us tonight for this important discussion on the chronic and growing need for more housing in Alaska. But before we get to that discussion, we'll start off with some of the top stories of the week from Alaska Public Media's collaborative statewide news network. Eugene Peltola Jr., the husband of U.S. Representative Mary Peltola, was killed after his plane crashed Tuesday night in a remote area of western Alaska. Following the announcement of his death, condolences have poured in from across the state, with friends and family remembering Peltola Jr., known as Buzzy, for his sense of humor, years of public service, and commitment to his loved ones. In a statement announcing his death, congressional staff for Representative Peltola described her husband as a devoted family man who was obnoxiously good at everything. Mary and Eugene Peltola Jr. have a large blended family that includes 7 children. President Joe Biden led a memorial at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage on Monday on the anniversary of the September 11th attacks. The president stopped at JBER on his way back from the G20 summit in India and a diplomatic visit in Vietnam. During his remarks, the president described that day 22 years ago as a day that tested the strength, resolve, and courage of all Alaskans. He went on to decry all forms of terrorism, both foreign and domestic, and used the remembrance to call for national unity. Employees of the Alaska Public Offices Commission recommended fines totaling nearly $50,000 for people behind the drive to repeal ranked choice voting in Alaska. In a formal report to the Commission, the staff alleges that Art Mathias and the anti-ranked choice groups he leads, including Alaskans for Honest Elections, violated multiple provisions of Alaska's campaign reporting laws. The report arises from the investigation of a complaint by the proponents of Alaska's new voting system, including the author of the ballot measure that implemented the system, alleging that Mathias illegally funneled $90,000 in campaign contributions through a religious organization to disguise their source and obtain a tax deduction. The Commission is expected to consider the report when it meets on September 28th. You can find the full versions of these stories and more on our website, alaskapublic.org, or get breaking news alerts right to your phone by downloading the Alaska Public Media app. Now on to our discussion for this evening. Across Alaska, it's a challenge to find affordable housing. Home building and vacancy rates are down, while rent, mortgage rates, and home prices are up. The lack of affordable housing drives people into overcrowded homes and homelessness or out of state. Some officials have begun referring to it as a housing crisis. Alaska Public Media's Jeremy Shea reports.
Generally, it was like I'd apply.
Eric Peterson is 32 years old and was born and raised in Anchorage. He was living abroad in Japan until 5 months ago when he moved back home, into the house he grew up in with his parents.
And I don't have to pay rent, which is amazing, because the rent is out of control.
He says he has a good-paying job and could buy a modest place in town for himself and his French bulldog, but he doesn't think he'll stay in Anchorage long-term. He says in Japan, he rented a great apartment for $400 a month.
And then I come back to Anchorage, Alaska, and they're like, we want $1,400 a month for like some, 1980s never remodeled special. And I'm like, I'm not going to pay that. I don't think anybody should have to. And I just think that the average rental prices of any form of housing in Anchorage, as well as purchasing price of anything, is completely out of control.
According to state economists, the average home in Anchorage cost about $469,000 last year. That's up 20% in just a few years. The cost of rent has also been climbing in recent years across much of the state, and in Anchorage especially.
If you look at the cost of land in most communities, labor has gone up in most communities, materials have gone up, transportation for the materials have gone up, and we've gotten to a situation where now even building market homes, developers can't afford to build it and then sell it at what they built it for. That's making housing prices go up.
Plus, the cost of borrowing to buy a home has climbed to the highest rates in decades. The Alaska Housing Finance Corporation is a special agency that can tap into capital markets regular lenders can't. That way, it can offer a lot of Alaska homebuyers mortgages at better than market rates.
As an example, a year or two ago, 21% of the houses that folks were buying in Alaska were HFC loans. This year it's 34%.
In Soldotna, the nonprofit Rural Cap is overseeing work to build 9 homes. These construction workers, they're also the owners. 9 local families are working together to build 9 homes through Rural Cap's Mutual Self-Help Housing Program. The nonprofit's program connects lower-income families with low-interest and subsidized mortgages from the federal government. Each family commits to work 36 hours a week on the houses. Volunteers can contribute too. Their sweat equity covers the down payments. Rhonda Johnson learned about the program in 2009. She was working at Walmart at the time and renting an apartment for herself and 4 kids.
Oh no, there's no way I could have bought a home. A sweat equity, I would say, who has $30,000 to put down on a home? I don't.
It took about 7 years before Johnson qualified, made it up the wait list, and finished her home.
And then I had friends and builds after mine, and I just helped build, and I just love to volunteer. And
within a few years, she logged thousands of volunteer hours on 45 homes. She won a National Volunteer Award in 2021. Now she works for Rural Cap on the program. She says it's fulfilling.
Just to move in and they could say it's their own home. I built it with my hands.
Rural Cap's program has helped thousands of people since it started in 1971. But there is a new building technology on the horizon that could dramatically lower the cost of market rate housing. 3D concrete printing. Next year, Nome will be the testing ground for a system like this to lay the foundation, walls, and roof of a home. The city and its partners are getting a federal grant to build demonstration homes to test the feasibility and economics. But barring disruptive tech breakthroughs, Alaskans like Eric Peterson are advocating for relaxing the rules that govern what can and can't be built as a more immediate path toward affordable housing.
So many of Anchorage's problems could be alleviated with cheaper housing.
Reporting from Soldotna and Anchorage, I'm Jeremy Shea.
Joining me tonight to better understand how we ended up in a housing crisis and to discuss the various efforts underway to encourage more home construction is Dr. Daniel Voland. Daniel is an Anchorage Assembly member and has been working together with other Assembly members on zoning reform to help address housing needs. We'll discuss some of that in a minute. Also with us this evening is Nolan Klauda. Nolan is the Executive Director of the University of Alaska Center for Economic Development. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks for having us, Lori.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So, Daniel, I want to start with you. There are more than 200 places being converted from hotels to housing in the city currently through a public-private partnership. Give us your assessment and kind of an overview of how large the housing problem still is for Anchorage, and what do you think the next fastest step is for creating more?
Well, thank you, Lori. You know, I'm one of those people who would contend that we do have a housing crisis on our hands and that there is a direct connection between lack of affordable housing and the homelessness issue that we're facing as a municipality. The Anchorage Assembly has worked very aggressively to use federal funds to convert hotel rooms to housing. In fact, when I was first elected, one of my first co-sponsored appropriations was to help close the sale of the guest house downtown that is used for extremely low income housing. That's folks who work or have some type of supplementary income, be it disability or Social Security, and they're on a lease, and so they have skin in the game, and they get to be stably housed. And then there are also, there's a small percentage of those rooms that are used for permanent supportive housing for folks that have more needs and maybe need more wraparound services. That program is going really well. That location is being very well operated with minimal impact to the neighborhood. We have hundreds more units coming online, as you said, whether that's the Golden Lion, the Lake House, the former Barrett Inn will be coming online soon. But we have a long way to go. The 2040 land use plan envisioned that we would have to be building about 840 units per year to keep up with projected growth by 2040. Anchorage is falling far short of that. We aren't even achieving half of that. We're only building less than 400 units per year. So I think we need to be building more housing at every income level, whether that's extremely low income, affordable housing, or if it's middle market housing, even luxury housing, which frees up the housing ladder. If folks are moving up into higher income housing, that frees up that middle market for those young professionals or working age population or families that are getting started to be able to afford housing as well.
And we'll talk about some incentives such as your thoughts on zoning reform in just a bit. But Nolan, outside of Anchorage, where are some of the other areas of Alaska that you see that have the most extreme need?
Sure. Well, thanks, Lori. I think that most of the state of Alaska has some version of a pretty serious housing problem right now. And it's not necessarily the same problem everywhere. I think that the challenges that we have in Anchorage are different from those that would be in a small rural village. But I think that the challenges are especially acute in a lot of the rural communities that are off of the road system. They have much more expensive shipping costs, much more expensive labor costs, material costs. And so those are the kinds of places where the cost to build the home and the cost of and the sales price of the home are just so out of sync that really no private developer would typically be able to make a profit building housing, and as a result, very little housing gets built unless there's some kind of public money behind it in a lot of Alaska. But I think you can also talk about places that are relatively urban, like Juneau, like Sitka, like Ketchikan, where there's just not quite enough housing getting built. A lot of times reasons are land availability, construction costs, labor costs, and labor shortages, I think, are all factors that contribute to it.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, in response to the recent report from the State Labor Department about the big uptick in rent expense across the state, you sent this message on X, formerly Twitter. Our zoning codes encourage the most expensive type of housing that uses the most land and takes up the most square footage. Describe what's happening there. How is this the code?
Well, I would say that there's a disconnect between our adopted plans, the 2020 Comprehensive Plan and the 2040 Land Use Plan, which encourage housing density and housing diversity, all kinds of housing, whether that's accessory dwelling units, which, as you know, the Anchorage Assembly has been supportive of, or townhomes, condos, small multifamily. But once we try to make that connect to our zoning code, our Title 21 code, and not only zoning, but also dimensional and design standards, often we can't achieve the type of housing density and diversity that the plan calls for because of overregulation or because things like building heights or setbacks or minimum lot sizes, those standards don't actually allow developers to build that type of housing. So I'm interested in how can we marry the two, and how can we simplify our zoning code. Right now, myself and my colleagues, Member Brawley and Member Zolotel, are working on a project that we're calling the Home Initiative that would do a few things. Number one, it would consolidate residential zoning. And I want to be very clear that it does not impact commercial zoning. It does not impact industrial zoning. It will not allow a junkyard or an auto body shop next to your home. But it will simplify, if it passes, residential zoning code. Right now we have 15 residential zones in the municipality. Our plan would consolidate it to 5 zones and hopefully give a little bit more flexibility and predictability in those various zones. They also are informed by that 2040 land use code. They come directly from the land use designations that are in that plan and that are already mapped. So somebody could look at the map and say, okay, this is the designation that I would fall into.
And how big a piece do you think this is as far as, I mean, if you got the changes passed and suddenly it was reduced to 5, do you think we would see a dramatic increase in housing? I mean, how big a problem is zoning?
I think it is a piece of the puzzle, and I would argue it's a big piece of the puzzle, especially when you look to the Mat-Su. I mentioned earlier that Anchorage is struggling to build less than 400 units a year. Mm-hmm. Well, Mat-Su is building like crazy. They're building about 2,000 units per year. Now, one of those factors is the land availability that Nolan mentioned. But we have to look, when it comes to Anchorage, what are the things that are in our control? We can't control all of the broader economic forces that result in higher cost of construction, but can we control our own regulations when it comes to what types of housing is allowed to be built? I would argue yes. Now, I don't think we're going to see an overnight change in our neighborhoods with, all of a sudden we're going to see tons of small and large multifamily. I think we're going to see more incremental change over time.
But it's got to start somewhere.
But it's got to start somewhere, exactly.
Nolan, how do you see this? Does that marry up with what your research shows as far as how zoning codes can either incentivize or complicate building? And how do we compare to other cities of our size?
Sure, I do think zoning is part of the problem that we have. I think that when we look at how our rates of building new home construction in Anchorage are very, very low, even compared to the state level, which is already pretty low, but abysmal compared to the country as a whole, probably zoning is a major contributor to that. It is not the entire story. There are certainly all kinds of other factors. The lack of buildable land in Anchorage. I mean, it's not quite true that we're fully built out, but we have a fairly low density of development in Anchorage, but we don't have a lot of just open green fields that are ripe for development. So zoning is something that policymakers at the local level do have some amount of control over, and so it makes sense to look towards that as at least one potential solution, or at least a part of the solution, to allow for more density, for more types of homes to be built, and to not have to force us into this very low density format that really we've grown up with in Anchorage for a few decades.
And how do we compare, if you know, to other cities of our size as far as complexity with zoning?
Well, compared to other cities in the U.S. and other states in the U.S., Anchorage is very poor. Nationally, you see about 5 homes for every 1,000 residents getting built. Just across the country, for every 1,000 residents, about 5 homes get built. In Anchorage, we do just about 1 home for every 1,000 residents, and so our rates are quite abysmal for our population size.
I am sure that landlords really enjoy the tight market, but how does the lack of affordable housing disrupt economic growth and community stability?
It does. It works in a lot of different ways. I think when you think about how people are looking for places to live, younger people who are moving, who are kind of establishing their own households, people who have left the state that want to come back, or people who might be interested in coming to Alaska, high cost housing and low availability really discourage that. So it's something that feeds into our out-migration trend to at least some degree. So that's one aspect of it. So when we start to think about labor force shortages and some of the economic challenges that the state has, if we had greater openness in our housing market, some of those problems would be alleviated.
Let's talk for just a minute about different challenges in places outside of urban centers like Anchorage, Juneau, and Fairbanks. For rural communities, what are the restrictions? I was looking at information this morning from the Association of Alaska Housing Authorities, and they noted there's no housing funds within the federal infrastructure bills, and for tribal housing, the Indian Housing Block Grant for 2023 was $114 million, but it hasn't been adjusted for inflation in many years. How do you see this picture for the rural areas of the state?
Yes, it's a really thorny problem, I think, in rural Alaska because of the economics of housing, of how expensive it is to build and what price you could actually charge somebody to buy the home. it just doesn't work out very well. So there isn't really a very functional business model for a developer to actually build the homes that can be purchased by anyone locally. And you add to the fact that you have a lot of lower incomes, higher unemployment in a lot of rural parts of the state. And so it paints a picture of basically needing that federal money, like those federal dollars that you mentioned from HUD or from others, in order to see any housing get built. And so when those, and it takes quite a bit of money to build housing, so those dollars don't necessarily go that far toward alleviating the housing shortages that you see in rural Alaska. It's not so much there about the same kinds, in Anchorage we talk about zoning and permitting restrictions, and in rural areas those aren't really the major constraints. It really is the public money availability to build the housing.
Is it also the complexity in the layers of who actually has fee to the land, the title to the land, and are there problems that people run into in that regard also when they're trying to build in rural areas?
That can be complicating because you do have a lot of areas of federal ownership, so where you wouldn't be able to build if it's a national wildlife refuge and so on. But there are ways that some of the native lands, like ANCSA lands, can be used, with the right sorts of permissions. So sometimes land availability could be a major problem. It's not always the biggest issue. There's also issues of topography, the buildable surface area in a lot of parts of the state. Those contribute as well. But I think that the availability of public funds and the expense of building homes are really the biggest problems in rural Alaska.
And I know that prices vary widely around the state depending on where you are and where you have to send materials, but compare building a new home in Anchorage to somewhere on the Kobuk River. Is it 3 times as expensive, 4 times?
Well, I couldn't give you an exact estimate for it, but I can tell you that as a very rough general rule, Anchorage construction costs about 40% above the national average. That's just kind of a general rule of thumb that the developers will cite. And when you talk about building in a place like Bethel or an outlying village, then you're talking about the additional cost of shipping those materials there and how that could be, it could easily get to another 50 or 60%, just as kind of approximate figures, or even more than that. And so it really starts to escalate.
Dramatically.
I think we'd be remiss too, Lori, if we didn't point out the challenges of climate change in some of those communities.
Yes.
We're looking at
Right,
melting
permafrost
permafrost in Quinnahock that is destroying the plumbing of buildings. Communities like Shishmaref and Kivalina that may have to be relocated due to
$114 million
erosion.
is a drop in the bucket compared to the needs, and especially in the Arctic areas. Daniel, in our final minute here, you want to encourage more triplex, fourplex construction, multifamily housing. Given the constraints of distance from supplies and other factors that add expense and aren't going away, how can local leaders incentivize this to boost more housing?
So I'm working on a project right now to encourage triplex and fourplex development, working on that with my colleagues Member Solt and Member Cross. And I'm very excited about that. We've had a number of productive working group conversations involving the traffic department, the fire department, the building department, the planning department, and we're looking at all of those processes that are involved. Once you go beyond a duplex, you have to have things like on-site traffic circulation, a drainage review, off-site improvements, all of these things that escalate the time and the cost. And so we're looking at how can we right-size those regulations to encourage that type of development. And I'll just say for myself, I'm a young professional. I own or occupy a duplex. I live up top with my fluffy dog Juniper, and downstairs below a speech therapist and a planner. And so because I own or occupy my small multifamily house, 3 young professionals get to live in a desirable neighborhood close to downtown, close to the coastal trail, city market, grocery store. And so I really appreciated the opening package of this program that looked at the story of a young professional and how hard it is for both renters, but also those who want to achieve the dream of home ownership.
Many people often cite Airbnb and other short-term rentals as a big part of the problem. Is it from your perspective?
So I think Nolan would probably agree with me that we need updated data. Some of the data that we are working off of when it comes to short-term rentals is from a housing study in 2012. So there is an effort right now underway to do a new housing study. There are certainly areas of Anchorage that I think are more impacted. Girdwood, I believe, has something like 37% of their housing units as short-term rentals. Downtown has a lot of short-term rentals. I'm not on this project, but a few of my colleagues are looking at potentially doing registration and a permitting fee for short-term rentals in Anchorage.
Nolan, your thoughts in a few seconds here about those constraints of short-term rentals?
Short-term rentals are probably something that's contributing to an increase in rents, you know, in many communities around the state and including here in Anchorage. I think that it is a part of that increase. And what concerns me especially about short-term rentals is that over time they increase, right? That we've seen, we don't have perfect data, but the data that we do have show that more and more of our housing stock is tied up in those short-term rentals, and that probably is a problem.
All right, thank you both so much. That time went by so quickly. Thanks for being here this evening. Access to affordable, stable housing helps make so many other things in life easier. When people can pay their rent or mortgage without worrying about whether they can buy food or pay other bills, they have better health outcomes. They can contribute more to their family and community well-being, and a stable home life helps children get a good start on a path to a brighter future. It's in all of our best interest to support investing in a wide range of housing options for economic growth and community health and cohesion. That's it for this edition of Alaska Insight. Visit our website, alaskapublic.org, for breaking news and reports from our partner stations across the state. While you're there, sign up for our free daily digest so you won't miss any of Alaska's top stories of the day. We'll be back next Friday. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Lori Townsend.